Well, a soon-to-be mom was showing her new nursery to her best friend. And her friend's response was, "Oh, it's so adorable." You see, the whole bedroom was decorated with stuffed animals and boats with cute animals hanging off the sides. It was a Noah's Ark theme. The story we're going to look at this morning, today, it's most people refer to it as Noah's Ark. And it's often thought of as just a cute story, or maybe even a good story for kids. And pictures decorate the walls of preschool classrooms and kids' clothes, and even our stroller when our kids were little had Noah's Ark on it. It's not bad to decorate with pictures of animals in the ark. But this is so much more than a cute story. In fact, it's not really a cute story at all. It's actually rather serious. Let me give you a few other possible titles that you could call this account, or ways you could describe this account. You could call it the flood of judgment and the ark of grace. Or Noah, the one guy who stood out from the rest of the world. Or worshiping God who loves people and hates sin. Any of those could work. The flood account is a story of judgment and salvation. And as the story begins, the world is overwhelmed by sin. And then the world is overwhelmed by the waters of judgment. And finally, Noah is overwhelmed by God, and he worships. And so we begin in chapter 5 as we see the world is overwhelmed by sin. Chapter 5, verse 1 says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. And he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters." Okay, so this is the beginning of the genealogy that runs from Adam to Noah. And I want us to notice a few things here in this genealogy, but beginning first with these verses that we just read. You see the words image and likeness there? If you remember, Adam was created in the image and likeness of God. But now we have Seth being born in the image and likeness of Adam, his father. The significance of this is that both the image of God and the sin nature of Adam are being passed on from generation to generation. And this genealogy, as you read through it, highlights the consequences of sin. In fact, look at verse 5. Chapter 5, verse 5 says, "Thus, all the days of Adam that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died." Jump down to verse 8. "Thus, all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died." Verse 11. "Thus, all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died." And it continues that way. Each person being named, and each generation being named, and being told, "and he died." Because of sin, people die. And in this genealogy of the godly line of Seth, we see some very long lives, hundreds of years, but they die. Even though they live a long time, eventually they die. But there's one exception. Look at verse 21. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God. After he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So Enoch, we're told here, he walked with God. This implies that he was godly, but it says even more than that. It says that he had a close, intimate relationship with God. And then he was not. In other words, he was gone because God took him. God spared Enoch from death. In fact, Hebrews 11:5 explains it this way. Hebrews 11:5 says, by faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And then the genealogy continues, and it ends with Noah and his 3 sons. But look at verse 28 and 29. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. And so Noah's father, Lamech, and this is a different Lamech than the Lamech we read about last week, who was in the line of Cain, who took 2 wives and murdered a man. But Lamech, Noah's father, speaks prophetically here and says that Noah will bring relief. Now, it probably happened a different way than his father expected, but it did actually happen. But in this genealogy, we see that God is still involved with humanity, and he is working his plan to redeem and deliver them. But now, as we continue reading, we see that, that society has continued to decline. Noah is living in a time of unchecked evil. Look at chapter 6 and verse 1. He says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And so we read of this strange situation here, and there has been a lot of dispute over what had happened at this time. And but we see that the sons of God had married and had children with daughters of men. Now the question is, who are the sons of God and who are the daughters of men? And now there was a very common traditional interpretation that the sons of God were the men in the godly line of Seth, and that the daughters of men were women in the ungodly line of Cain. But there's really nothing in the context here to support that view, that idea. Let me just give you my understanding of what's happening here and why. So first, when the Old Testament uses the title sons of God, it normally refers to angels. For example, in Psalm 29, it says, ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. That's the way the ESV translates it, O heavenly beings. It's literally sons of God. It's talking about angels. And other places as well. But that we're talking about angels here is also supported by the New Testament. Both Peter and Jude speak of angels who had stepped out of their place and are now held in chains awaiting judgment, the final judgment. And Peter, when he's talking about it, he specifically also mentions the flood. He ties this into the time of the flood. And so it's fitting that the oldest interpretation of this passage is that the sons of the sons of God were fallen angels or demons, and the daughters of men were human women, and that they married and had offspring. Now, this is a very straightforward explanation of what we read in the passage, but there's one problem with it. Angels are spirits. They do not have bodies, and they cannot procreate. They can't reproduce. So most likely what happened here is that fallen angels or demons lusted after human women. They saw that they were beautiful, and then they possessed men who then married these women and had children with them. And their offspring were powerful, strong men or giants. They were great warriors. And so this happens, and God says that his spirit or his breath will not abide or remain or contend with man forever. You see, God gives life. And so when it says that his spirit, it either refers to God's life-giving spirit, the Holy Spirit who gives life, or to the breath of life that is from God. Because life and spirit, breath and spirit, same word in Hebrew. And so it could mean either one of those things. But the point is that man won't live forever. And then he gives a limit. He says only 120 years. Now again, this may refer to how long it will be until the flood, or it could refer to a shortening of man's average lifespan. But there's something significant about this, something else significant about this. God gave people grace. He's giving people time to repent. He shows grace. Well, we continue reading in verse 5. It says, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." So the people of earth have become evil to the core. And God, we're told, he saw their great wickedness. Now, this may remind you of creation, because what did God do? We're told that God saw. And when he saw, during creation, he saw that it was good, right? But now he sees evil. But look how people are described. I mean, their wickedness is great. And he says that every intention of the thoughts of their hearts is only evil continually. I mean, that's a strong statement. But what he's saying is, so we're always thinking about sinning. The inner inclinations of people is always opposed to God. And God considers what he sees, and he comes to a decision. He is sorry that he created man. Their sin is offensive to him, and it brings him sorrow and pain. You see, he created us, and he chose to love us and to have a relationship with us, but we rebelled. And it's so bad that God decides to blot out humanity. Rather than let the evil continue, he will remove them from existence. But, and this is one of those Hebrew contrast clauses that we talked about before last week, and it calls for us to pay attention. In verse 8, what's it say? It says, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." You see, the world is overwhelmed by sin, but Noah found favor or grace from God. Noah pleased God, and this is further explained later, but he pleased God and he receives grace. He will be spared judgment. But soon the entire world will be overwhelmed in judgment. We continue reading then in chapter 6, verse 9. "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth." So with these words, these are the generations of Noah. The next major section of Genesis begins. But these verses also tell us something about Noah and his character. First of all, he was righteous. He lived in line with God's standards. He was morally upright. He was godly. Also, he was blameless in his generation. And so he was different than others. And he had integrity. He was wholeheartedly committed to God. And this, when it says that he's blameless, it doesn't mean that he was sinless, but he had godly character. And we're told that he walked with God. In other words, he's in the same category as Enoch. He is living in close, intimate relationship with God. On the other hand, look at God's assessment of the rest of the world in verse 11 and 12. "Now the earth was corrupt," or ruined, in God's sight. "And the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on earth." So the earth was corrupt. What started out as good has now been twisted. So it is spoiled. It is ruined. And we're told that it was filled with violence. The earth was filled with violence. Now, we saw the beginning of this violence last week when Cain murdered Abel, and then Lamech killed the other man. So we saw the beginnings of this, but it's gotten worse. Everyone's out to hurt and to wound and to kill others. They're rude and ruthless, and it's just become a way of life. But Noah stood out. He was different. And God noticed him because Noah lived by faith. He lived in close communion with God. And as a result of his close relationship with God, he was righteous, he was blameless, and he was obedient to God. And you know what? As a Christian, you can stand out too. Our world, our society is not righteous. There is very little integrity in our world. I mean, people lie and cheat and steal all the time. Selfishness is the norm in our world. But hopefully we're different than that. But what will make us different? What will make us different is if we walk with God. You see, living in a close relationship with God, spending time with Him, talking to Him, reading in His Word and meditating on His Word, on His truth, And as we do that, he changes our hearts. He changes our desires. And as he changes our hearts and desires, then we obey and we do what's right. If you walk with God, you will stand out in this world. Now back to the text. God has made his assessment and has decided what must be done. Look at verse 13. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So God tells Noah the plan here. All flesh is corrupt, is ruined, and now must die. And by the way, when he says all flesh here, all flesh doesn't refer only to people, but also to animals. They are corrupt as well. All flesh is going to be wiped out for this corruption. So both people and animals were doing wrong and are committing violence, and now will die. And the earth needs to be cleansed. We keep reading verse 14. He says, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above. By the way, a cubit is about 1.5 feet. All right? So the ark is about 1.5 football fields long. Okay? So it's big. He says, make it with a lower section and second and third deck. Verse 17, for behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kind, and of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kinds. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also, take with you every sort of food that is eaten and stored up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. So God tells Noah here to build an ark, and he tells him how to build it, and it's huge. And he tells them how he will destroy all flesh, and he's going to flood the earth and wipe out everything on the earth. But God will keep his promise, and he will protect Noah and his family. And Noah will bring the animals on the ark as well with him. And so there will still be animals on the earth after the flood. And Noah has to take food for all his family and all of the animals. And when God tells Noah to do all this, what does Noah do? Look at verse 22. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Noah did all that God commanded. This is a very simple statement. He did it. Now think for a minute about what that means. Think for a minute about the cost there was for Noah, what this cost him. I mean, besides the social aspects, you know, the ridicule that he would be getting, why are you building this huge boat? What are you doing? It would make no sense to people. And I'm sure he faced lots of ridicule. But besides that, think for a minute about this. There would have been expenses to build this large boat. And it would take a lot of work. I mean, he had to go, and not only this, but the work was over a long period of time. I mean, years. But he had to go and he had to gather the materials. He had to go gather all the food. He had to go cut down trees and haul them to the build site and process, do whatever. You couldn't go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy 2x4s. All right? He had to do all of this work. And then he had to gather all the animals, and he had to build something that I'm sure he had never built anything like this before, even smaller. But God tells him to do it, and he does it. But it's interesting that we're not given any details about all of this, about all the work that he did. We're just told that Noah did it. You see, the account puts very little focus on what Noah had to do in order to obey, just on the fact that he obeyed. But this very simple statement is very significant because it shows the continuing faith of Noah. And that because of that faith, whatever God told him, he did it. He trusted God and he obeyed. So now as we continue reading, we jump ahead in time, and it's the week before the flood. Look at chapter 7 and verse 1. The Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation." This repeats why God is showing Noah grace and why he is saving Noah. God considers Noah to be righteous. Verse 2, "Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, a male and his mate. And 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens, also male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. So they've got 7 days to load up. And we get a few more details about God's instructions. So Noah is to take 7 pairs of clean animals. So these are animals that could be offered as sacrifices and worship to God. And 1 pair of unclean animals. Now, it's interesting that the Old Testament has not yet stated which animals are clean and unclean, which fall in which categories. But Noah must have known. And maybe it was from his walking with God, his close relationship with God, or they may have already, these categories may have already been established as a norm, because sacrifices go back, as we saw before, all the way back to Adam and Eve. But the animals are taken on board in order to preserve life. And then it's repeated that Noah did all that God commanded. Verse 6, chapter 7, verse 6 says, "Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came upon the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in." The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals, and creeping things, and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Now let me point out just a few things from this. After the 8 people and all the animals got on the ark, we're told that God shut the door. So God shut and sealed the door. He's protecting them. Notice what it says. It says that all the fountains of the deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven opened. And so the water rushed from underground and from above, from the sky. It just dumped from the sky. Now, have you ever been hit by water? I mean, maybe someone's taken and thrown a bucket of water and you've been hit with it. It's heavy. You feel it. Or maybe you've been out in the ocean and been hit by a wave. Water is heavy. It's powerful. Or maybe you've been caught in a downpour of rain. Now, if you've never been out of California, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. When we lived in Illinois, one time, our family, we were at Six Flags, and it started raining, and it started raining hard, and we decided it was time to leave. And so we headed out the park. And by the time we got to the parking lot, it was pouring so hard, you could not see 3 or 4 or 5 feet ahead of you. It was raining so hard that we were running to our car, hoping no one else is driving by to hit us. But we're running to our cars. By the time I got to the car, I wasn't wet. I was drenched. And the water wasn't like hitting me. It was running off of me. I mean, just flowing off of me. It was pouring. And as you ran through that rain with the rain falling, it was hard to breathe. It was almost, kind of like being waterboarded. It was just, you gasped to catch your breath. That's the power of water, okay? They needed protected. And God was protecting them. He closed the door to protect them. Another thing is the storm it stormed for 40 days. But the water covered the earth, we're told, for 150 days. More details about that. But what do we see? All life on earth was wiped away. This was God's judgment against sin. And this judgment was overwhelming. If those on the ark had not been protected by God, they would have had no chance. But in the flood, we see a kind of undoing of creation. Remember when God created the land, what did he do? He separated the waters from the waters and made the land inhabitable. Now the waters are again covering the entire earth. It's no longer inhabitable or able to sustain life. And as the waters prevail over the earth or completely cover the earth, this is kind of an eerie scene. There was this great storm, this like chaos going on, and now the ark is just quietly drifting in a wide, wide ocean of water. And in this calm, we get another picture. God has washed the evil that had covered the land. He's washed it away. But this was a drastic action to take. I mean, this was huge. It was destructive. And there's two important things we need to see in this event. One is that sin is incredibly offensive to God. And sin has terrible consequences. And if we recognize this, it will affect our choices in life. Live by faith and obey God. The second thing we see here is that the grace of God is even greater than our sin. Without God's grace, we wouldn't be here today. And we would have no hope for the future. Thank God for his grace. Well, Noah was thankful and was overwhelmed by God and his grace. Look at chapter 8, verse 1. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. Now, this first verse is a little summary statement, and then the details will be given. But this is the turning point, and the turning point comes here with this little statement. God remembered Noah. Now, this doesn't mean that God had forgotten about him and forgotten about the animals with him, but that he's turning his attention to Noah. To Noah and the animals and his promise. And he's beginning to act on that promise. Let's keep reading verse 2. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. At the end of the 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him anymore. In the 601st year, on the 1st month of the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and creeping things that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. Now, so this tells us their time on the ark, but let me simplify it for you. Okay? They entered the ark on the 17th day of the 2nd month. In our thinking, we would think February 17th. Okay? That's not necessarily right, but I'm just saying that's the way we would think of it. So on the 17th day of the 2nd month. and the storm starts. We often think of them being on the ark for 40 days, but that's not right. It rained, it stormed for 40 days. So that's just how long the storm lasted. The waters then covered the earth and went up higher than the mountains. After 150 days, so 5 months later, on the 17th day of the 7th month, the water dropped enough for the ark to rest on a mountain. Then, on the first day of the 10th month, the mountaintops were visible. And once a week for a month, Noah sent out a raven and then 3 doves to see if there was dry land anywhere, what the birds would do. And the last time the dove doesn't return, but he still waits. Noah still waits in the ark. On the first day of the next year, the waters are gone. But then on the 27th day of the 2nd month, the ground is completely dry. So what I imagine is that the water was gone, but the ground was still just mud puddle. All right? It was muddy and messy. So he waits. But now the ground is completely dry. And at this point, God tells him to come out. So the ark, they were in the ark for 1 year and 10 days. Now imagine being there with all those animals for 1 year and 10 days. It had to have stunk. I mean, if you've ever been to the zoo, you know what I mean. And the zoo is outside in the open air. And I figured this is probably why Noah opened the roof at one point. But notice that even though Noah was checking things out, he opened the window, he opened the roof, he sent out the birds, he still stays on the ark until God tells him to come out. Again, that's trust, it's faith, it's obedience and waiting on God. And then God tells them, Noah's family and the animals, he tells them to go out, be fruitful, and multiply. He's repeating the blessing that he gave at the start. And so they all come out of the boat, out of the ark, and they start over. This is a new beginning. It's a fresh start. There's new hope, and life continues on. Now, after being stuck on the ark for 1 year, the first thing I would want to do is go run around. Maybe play a little, get some exercise, something like that. Or I'd also want to go explore. Where are we? See the new sights. How have things changed? Where are we and where do we want to live? But look what Noah did, verse 20. Chapter 8, verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. The first thing Noah does is worship. You see, his priorities are right. His heart is right. He's continuing to walk with God. He knows the right thing to do. And at his first opportunity, he builds an altar and sacrifices to God to worship. He also understands that it's only by God's grace that he's still here. Only by God's grace that he has been spared judgment. And I imagine that he is overwhelmed by God's grace. And so he worships. But this new era for humanity, it begins as it should. it begins in worship and in right relationship with God. And God is pleased by Noah's faith, expressed through his obedience and his offering. And God accepts his worship, and he responds to it with a promise. God resolves within himself that he will never again curse the ground because of people's sin. And he also says that he won't destroy all that lives on the earth again. So life and the patterns that God created will go on as long as the earth exists. While the earth remains, those words, while the earth remains, may suggest until the final judgment. But the emphasis here is on God's promise that life will endure and he will not destroy the life on earth again like in the flood as long as the earth exists. Now, notice that when God makes this promise, he makes it knowing that people still sin. He says, as he does this, I will never destroy the earth again, because, he says, the intentions of man's heart is evil from his youth. He knows this is the way we think. People have sinful desires. It's ingrained in us. We sin. God knows it. And he still makes this promise. Again, that's God's grace. And as God's people, we have been given grace. We've experienced his grace. We have been spared judgment and will be spared judgment. We've been accepted by God through Jesus. And he has given us his promise, even though we still sin. And he knows our hearts, and he continues to give us grace. And so we strive to live in obedience and to live to bring him glory. In Paul's word, the Apostle Paul's words in Romans 6, 1-2, he says this, "What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound?" Because God shows us grace when we sin. But are we to keep sinning because, well, it'll just show us more and more grace? He says, by no means. How can we who died to sin still live in it? And for God's people who know his grace, worship is a priority. When we understand his grace, we can't help but to worship him and make him a priority. And when we worship, God enjoys it. It pleases him. Hey, think about that. It's amazing that our offerings, our worship of God brings him pleasure. I mean, who are we? And who is he? But yet our offerings, our worship bring him pleasure. What a privilege it is to know and worship our God. Well, Noah's Ark is more than a cute story about animals. It's about an awesome and holy God. It's about sin and judgment and grace. And it's about a man who stood out from the rest and found favor with God. He did what God told him, whatever the cost. He lived by faith, and he pleased God. So be like Noah. Live by faith and stand out for God.